The question is that this House do now adjourn. Darren Henry.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for allowing me to take this time to hold this debate today. I'd like to discuss the effect that houses in multiple occupation, or HMOs, have on communities, specifically Beeston in my constituency of Broxtowe. HMOs, also known as shared houses, are properties that are rented out to multiple tenants who share communal facilities such as kitchens and bathrooms. While HMOs provide a flexible and affordable housing option for many people, they can also have a significant impact on the feel and look of communities. I'd like to briefly give you some information about Beeston. Beeston is the largest town in Broxtowe. It sits just southwest of Nottingham City. It has become a very multicultural town, and this has brought with it new arts and cultures to the area. Beeston also has a long history of being a family-focused town. While speaking with a local business owner who has lived in the town their whole life, they described Beeston by saying, "It was a town where everyone knew their neighbours and it held community at its heart." Now, my constituent Pauline recently wrote to me and stated that she felt as if Beeston had lost its identity. This is a feeling that I know is shared by many within the community. This is part due to the location of Beeston, which hugs the campus of the University of Nottingham. Owing to this, Beeston has become, with a significant number of student population that live there. And I wish to make it clear, though, at this point, that the student population has had an incredibly positive impact on Beeston. Features such as the new cinema complex and accompanying restaurants, including the delicious dessert bar, Rassam's Creamery, I might mention, may not have been there and been in place without the student population. They bring revenue to local businesses as well as support to our nighttime economy. It is important that when looking at regulations around HMOs, we do not make houses unaffordable to students as a consequence of that. However, a balance must be struck between the student population and local residents who are often losing out on resources and facilities in order to further HMOs to be created. And this is not fair on those families who have resided in Beeston, often for generations. One of the most significant effects of HMOs is the impact they have on the availability and affordability of housing for families and individuals. In areas where HMOs are prevalent, such as Beeston, there can be a shortage of family homes and rental properties, leading to higher rents and a lack of available housing for those in need. I received an email today from a resident in Beeston named Alistair, and he discussed how many young families have been priced out of Beeston due to landlords quickly securing properties to be used as student housing. He stated that it is causing Beeston to lose its lively vibe that it has become known for. It is incredibly important that families who have lived in Beeston for many years, and even new families wanting to relocate, do not find themselves priced out of the area. The concentration of HMOs in certain areas can lead to a transient population, with tenants coming and going quickly, resulting in a lack of stability and a sense of local community cohesion being broken. Further havoc can be caused when our communities of HMOs are not given thorough consideration before final approval. Recently, a construction company damaged a water main in Beeston whilst constructing a new HMO. The damage led to many houses being uninhabitable. Many groups and individuals in the community rallied around to assist these constituents, and I'd like to give a special thanks to Christchurch Chilwell for the help they gave. But many of these families have been left without answers and indicate to me that no one, as of yet, has been held to account. I have written to the Secretary of State about that specific issue and I await a response. Another impact of HMOs is the strain they can place on local infrastructure, such as waste management, parking and transportation.
Will my honourable friend give way?
I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. HMOs are of significant concern in my own constituency, and in Blackpool over decades we've seen former B&Bs and hotels converted into HMOs, meaning there's now an estimated 23,000 people across the town living purely in HMOs. Time and time again, residents speak to me about the problems these sometimes create, such as the imbalance in communities or indeed antisocial behaviour, which is at the forefront of my inbox. Blackpool Council have introduced an Article 4 direction to ensure that landlords keep on top of those antisocial behaviour issues and indeed absentee landlords. But my main concern is the ability of my local authority to actually ensure that those regulations are indeed followed through and held to account. Does my honourable friend share my concerns that when local authorities have those powers within the licensing system, it should use them and hold landlords to account?
Yes, I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention. I completely agree with what he has to say, and we do need to be very careful that local authorities stop the proliferation of these HMOs if it negatively impacts the communities that they're supposed to serve. HMOs create an increase in demand for services and facilities that were not designed to accommodate the larger number of people living in a single property. As a result, this can lead to an increase in litter, noise pollution and overcrowding on public transportation. This is something we have seen happen in Beeston. In essence, we must strike a balance between having HMOs and not losing our sense of community.
Will my honourable friend be willing?
I will.
I thank my honourable friend for bringing this to the House. We have a problem with it across Hyndburn and Hasland, and it's something I've raised with the department on numerous occasions for clarification around the planning law relating to HMOs. One thing that we did notice was that during the pandemic, companies bought up properties in low value areas and it went unnoticed during the pandemic when obviously all of the systems were very strained. So that's one of the issues that we're now dealing with because of what happened during the pandemic, and they are focusing on low value areas. But does my honourable friend agree with me that one of the things that we need to maintain is that this is spread across the country fair, because the problem that we see in East Lancashire and Lancashire as a whole is that build up in certain towns and villages?
Thank the honourable lady for her question. I do agree with her. Certainly we need to think about local authorities making sure that when housing and HMOs are built, that it's done in a fair way and it's in keeping with the feel of the communities they serve. Broxton Borough Council introduced an Article 4 direction in Beeston in order to slow the change in the community that has been occurring. Prior to Article 4, Beeston had been experiencing, as I mentioned, a rapid increase in the number of HMOs. HMOs are an important part of our housing mix in Broxton, but a sense of community cohesion can be lost when an area has an overconcentration of a single type of dwelling. This can include people not knowing their neighbours due to a constant turnover in occupiers, again leading to a lack of community feel. It was therefore decided that the council needed the power to evaluate proposed conversions of dwelling houses into HMOs and evaluate the effect of these conversions would have on the local community. Upon the completion of a consultation, the boundaries for the protected area were drawn up, which covered large parts of Beeston and Beeston Rylands. While the initiative was well-meaning, it has failed in places to address the problem and has had unintended consequences. Due to Article 4 not applying retrospectively to either the location of HMOs or their registration, vast amounts remain undetected by the council, leading to the possibility of conversions being allowed next to existing HMOs that the council are not aware of. On the introduction of Article 4, landlords were only required to sign an affidavit stating that the house had previously been an HMO, thus allowing them to navigate around the Article 4 planning permission, even if not true. Fortunately, the council is now requiring proof of previous HMO status. Due to the long period that it took for Article 4 to be finally approved, developers had plenty of time to take advantage of the lack of restrictions, with only the warning that regulation was on its way, and many feel that irreversible change to Beeston's community has indeed already taken place, rendering Article 4 a moot point. The other consequence is that developers are now looking further afield for new HMOs outside of the Article 4 area, putting at risk the communities of other areas, including Chilwell, Attenborough, Trowell and Bramcote. This must be addressed, and we must look at planning regulation to ensure that the individual identities of these places are not compromised. Small towns are being impacted by these decisions. HMOs are changing the nature of our communities. It would be unfair to say that all HMOs are having a negative impact, and I would like to reiterate that our student population has had, in my view...
I'm sorry to have to interrupt the honourable gentleman. The opposition front bench really does know the rules relating to the use of electronic devices in the chamber. There's plenty of space outside to do what the honourable ladies are doing. Darren Henry.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So HMOs are having a negative impact, and I would like to reiterate that our student population has had, in my view, an overall positive impact in Beeston. But each one must be decided by considering the street, town, neighbours and sense of community. It is imperative that planning officers take into account the needs of local permanent residents whilst making plans for developments. There is a need for planning rules to be revised and to ensure that HMOs are being approved by the local community for the local community. And could the Minister lay out for me today what the government is doing to address the rising number of HMOs and the impact these HMOs are having on communities?
Minister.
Thank you, Sir Roger, and what a pleasure it is to see you in your place, in this place. I would like to commend my honourable friend very much, the member for Broxtowe, for securing today's important debate. And it is also a pleasure to see my other honourable friends in their places representing their communities, Blackpool South and Hindburn. I do very much hope that my honourable friends will appreciate that due to my role within the planning system, I'm not in a position to comment in detail on the merits of any specific planning applications or appeals. But I do hope that he finds my explanation of what the government are doing to put communities at the heart of decisions and to tackle houses of HMO, the impacts of them, should I say, on his community helpful. He's right to say that HMOs provide relatively low-cost accommodation for rent and can play an important part in the housing market. However, he's also rightfully highlighted some concerns from the concentration of HMOs can bring, particularly in residential areas, and how that they can require control due to the impacts on local areas. HMOs, Sir Roger, are required to meet certain standards. They're subject to management regulations. These regulations impose duties on managers of HMOs, which include the duty to take safety measures, to supply and maintain gas and electricity, have these tested, as well as the duty to maintain common parts, fixtures and fittings. And all local authorities are required to licence HMOs with 5 or more people from 2 or more households, when they share facilities such as a kitchen or a bathroom. And through additional licensing, local authorities also have the power to require HMOs to be licensed when there are 3 or more unrelated people from 2 or more households sharing facilities. And local authorities do have strong powers also to regulate standards in HMOs, and they include HMO licensing, penalties of up to £30,000 for breaches of the law, rent repayment orders, and for the worst offenders, banning orders. Now, he's mentioned the role of the planning system and the role that has. So for smaller HMOs, national permitted development rights exist. They allow smaller homes to change use to an HMO for up to 6 people without the need for planning application. But, as he's highlighted in his area, local authorities can remove these rights by making an Article 4 direction. And this enables local authorities to protect important local areas where permitted development rights would have an adverse impact. And local authorities are required by law to publish a copy of the direction, consult with the community. The local planning authority then has a responsibility to decide whether to confirm the direction, taking into account any representations made during the consultation period from his constituents. That direction itself does not prevent development, but would mean that development cannot be carried out under the permitted development right, but it needs an application for planning permission, which means the local authority must consider the proposal in more detail. Of course, yes.
Sarah Brickliffe.
Giving way, I went back and forth with my local planning department on this because they didn't understand the regulation properly, because we are seeing this grow rapidly in areas, so it's quite new to them. So is there a case for the department, for her department to actually write to local authorities so that they do know what powers they have to take when this becomes an issue in their own area?
I thank my honourable friend for sharing her experience, and she will appreciate that I'm not able to comment on a specific planning determination in her area. But she's right to highlight that local authorities do have these powers, and they are responsible for informing themselves and using the powers responsibly. But I'm very happy to perhaps discuss with her outside this chamber what further action we could take to assist her community. So I also heard my honourable friend for Broxtowe comment that the Article 4 direction in his particular situation, he stated that he felt that was not having the effect that it should have had. I've heard his concerns, and again I'm very happy to meet him, because I cannot stray into the territory, Sir Roger, of commenting on a particular planning determination, which is rightly outside of a matter for Parliament to debate here. I will just say a couple of words about the planning application process, and I think my honourable friend's done a really excellent job of setting out the impact that HMOs have on a community which has long established roots. And I agree with him, of course, that students do bring a huge amount of benefit to a local area. They bring income, they bring vibrancy, but of course that changes the character of an area. And of course, in policy terms, it's about having that balance and making sure that everybody who lives in a community feels heard and represented. Communities play a key role in the planning system, and local people need to believe that it's worthwhile being involved to ensure that development is brought forward in a way that works best for them. Planning law does require that local planning authorities must undertake a formal period of consultation for a period of no less than 21 days prior to deciding a planning application. I will give way, of course.
Can I bring very briefly a case to the Minister's attention? A semi-rural area, just 6 to 8 houses, and all of a sudden one of those houses becomes, I think, what was traditionally known as a halfway house, so that's for ex-offenders. There are over 6 people there. No licence was applied for. Surely that shouldn't happen. Police have been called on many occasions because it does appear that violent offenders are being housed there, causing great worry to the families in those 6 or 8 houses surrounding it. Surely there must be a licence in place before it becomes such a halfway house.
I thank the honourable gentleman for bringing those concerns of his residents to the floor of the House, and of course he will appreciate that I'm not able to comment specifically on the circumstances surrounding that particular case, but again I'm more than happy to meet with him outside this chamber and look into the details of that more specifically. So I wanted to just make clear to my honourable friends the planning process, because it's absolutely right that local residents are able to raise concerns into the process, and they are taken into account. But every planning application is judged on its individual merit, and the weight given to these considerations is a matter for the local planning authority as the decision taker. But this brings me on to some of the other concerns that my honourable friend has raised about the conditions and the enforcement of conditions. Because when planning permission is granted, the local authority has powers to impose conditions, and, for example, it could require an applicant being required to complete a construction management plan. That would require the applicant to submit details on how they will minimise the impact of construction on local residents. And he's obviously raised a very concerning experience where a water main was burst, and clearly the government expects builders to act responsibly, and it may well be that there are some things that we can provide some more information to him. So I will ask my officials from my department to write to him to follow up that particular concern. Because if development is being carried out that's not in accordance with planning conditions, the government is very clear that local planning authorities have a range of planning enforcement powers which they can and should use to tackle breaches of planning control. And that enforcement is at their sole discretion, and it is for them to decide what, if any, enforcement action to take, depending on the particular circumstances of the case. I will just touch very briefly on the role of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, and we are bringing forward some ambitious and wide-ranging reforms through this bill, which is currently before Parliament. There are many proposals which will place communities at front and centre of the planning system, so we'll increase and enhance the opportunities for involvement to ensure that development is brought forward in a way that works best for local people. So in conclusion, Sir Roger, I would like to once again thank my honourable friend for a really useful and constructive debate, and also for my other honourable friends for their contributions as well, representing their constituents. And I hope in my remarks I've clearly set out the measures that we have in place to enable local authorities to control HMOs in their areas, and the steps the government is taking to ensure communities continue to have their say in development that affects them.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many of that opinion say aye? Aye. Contrary, no? Ayes have it. Order, order. Sorry, I've got you. 11:30 a.m.